Greetings, everyone. Your cartoonist pal Stan here with another episode of 50 Years in the Dungeon, the show where I'm celebrating the fact that 2024 was the 50th anniversary of the game Dungeons and Dragons. I always try and rush that through. And the entire hobby of tabletop role playing games. I've been doing that by having a series of conversations with people I know who have worked on the game and in the field for a lot of that period. And while we have those conversations, I will do a cartoon homage to a classic piece of D&D art. I've been taking one piece from each year of the 50 years of D&D. We are up to last year. We're up to 2024, which means that the whole project, within its initial scope, I'm going to complete the project. Oh, I should knock on wood somewhere. If nothing goes wrong, in the next week or two, we'll be completing the initial scope for this show. Don't worry, I'm having a lot of fun, and I'm going to keep the show going after that. But the initial, plan will have reached fruition. Very exciting. So I've talked to lots of folks. Some people you've known, some people have been more behind the scenes, some people have been a mixture of both, and that's who I've got tonight. Someone who's a mixture of both. Uh, he is best known probably as an editor on the Planescape team. That's when he was probably most out front. But people who've worked in the industry know him because he has continued to work in the industry throughout, even after leaving TSR. He's written at least one book. He's done some work in education and coaching, and he also is the best dang action figure uh, theater manager that I've ever met. And so I'm going to stop saying all these weird, crazy things. Just bring him in so we can chat. That is Ray Vallese. Hey, Ray.
Hello, Stan, and
Thank
hello, everyone out there in TV land. I will say up front, I've got a cough drop in my mouth to prevent coughing, so you guys will see me chomping on it a bit like I'm in an old-timey gangster movie.
It's that time of year. Let's see. We got David Schwartz is here, and Ian Watson is here, and
Hello,
Dave Pastor and Don Hunnewell.
Don. Oh,
All
Don's a friend
here
from
and all
college. Hey,
say
Don.
hi. And Michelle Vukovic. Hello.
Oh, Michelle. Hey, Michelle.
Ugh.
Oh,
I
this is
was telling
exciting.
I
I had
was
told
telling you
Stan.
to Ray. I was telling you before the show that I was having those little bits of technical difficulty, and that's why the thing we're looking at. Most of your um, most of your comments are doubling up, and it's because of the thing I was working on before. But
It's because people
Owen
are so
Stevens is
excited to see
here
me. They're all talking twice because they're just that excited.
because there's that excited to see you. Um, so hey Ray, how's it going?
Good. Very cold here in the Midwest, but it's a good day. Always happy to talk to you.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I met you when we were both working at TSR. What I know this we'll focus on TSR later, but what year did you start at TSR?
Spring of 1994.
Okay, because the one of the things that's come up in over the course of conversation is how many people got hired in 1995, and someone sent in Michael J. Pastor, in fact, who's in the chat, asked if you were another member of the class of '95, and my thought was, no, I think he's actually he was there already. He knew what was going on.
Oh yeah, I'm an old timer from '94. So I remember I started there like a month after Monty Cook did, and
Yeah.
my cube was right next to his cube. So, he's obviously a much bigger name, but if you know when he started, I was around that time.
So you were you a D&D player much before you joined the um was D&D a hobby of yours uh pre
Sort of. So, so this is what, like your 55th episode or so of the
for me?
show?
Yeah,
Is that about
55th
right?
episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know some of those shows didn't have guests because you had like an
Right.
unboxing video maybe, or an AMA. So you've
Right.
had what, probably 50 guests or so?
49 or you're either the 49, probably the 50th guest. Yes.
All right. Well, I was just going to say, out of all those 49 or 50 guests, I probably have a different story to most people because I didn't really grow up in the hobby like a lot of people did who've ended up in the industry. So as a kid, my main thing was reading comics, like for a lot of us too.
Right. Right.
Reading every Spider-Man comic I could get my hands on, Fantastic Four, and oh, I hope the movie's good.
Oh
We're
yeah.
due,
Oh
right?
yeah.
We're due for a good one. The old Marvel Godzilla series, because
Mm-hmm.
I was like a 10-year-old kid in the late 70s buying all this stuff. I recall my best friend who lived next door, he and I would mow lawns in the neighborhood. Parents would throw us quarters. I'd ride on my bike to the comic store and I'd buy another back issue of the Marvel Godzilla series.
All right.
Um,
I'm gonna reach over here for a second. I don't know if I can dig down. I've got as most right thinking people do. I've got a big pile of books next to my seat.
of course, I have a few behind me, but I have a lot of bookshelves in this room you can't see. Hey, Sue.
But you brought it up. I wanted to see. I've got the.
Oh, nice. I don't have that.
It just came
But
out.
anyway, yeah, that's the kind of goofy comic that I loved at the time. Godzilla gets shrunk and he's fighting rats in the sewer, and then he's in the Fantastic Four building, all that stuff. Anyway, batches of cheap coverless comics, trading comics with friends. And so I
Yeah.
was at the comic store all the time. And they also sold
So
gaming products there.
was this a comic store? So because
Yeah.
so this would have been like the era that comic stores were beginning to boom before game stores started booming.
Yes, because in my town, which was Rochester, New York, there must have been three or four good comic stores because I remember going to a lot of different ones. And this was one that was close enough to my house that we could ride our bikes there.
Right.
And they did have some gaming products in the comic store. And that's where I was going with this
I
because,
didn't know you were from Rochester.
yes, we might have talked about this before because you went to like
I
SUNY
went to Binghamton. Yeah.
Binghamton. Okay. Yeah, grew up in Rochester, went to RIT, technical college there. Um, yeah, upstate New York. And of
Yeah.
course, people from New York know that upstate means not New York City.
Like anything north of White Plains.
Yeah. Actually, Don Honeywell, who we saw in the chat, I think is from White Plains, New York. He was a college friend. Anyway, so yeah, so at this comic store, they've had some game products.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing, the classic basic first edition set, that purple box that probably a lot of guests on your show have talked about with the
Yeah.
dragon on the front. I remember thinking, oh, this looks pretty cool. And the owner, I don't know if he was desperate to start moving this new gaming thing to kids or whatever, he was really selling me hard on how cool this box set was.
Right.
And so I must have asked for it for my birthday or for Christmas and got it. Um, and I just loved it. And I think I had the original Monster Manual too, because, to a kid, that was the coolest of the core books.
Right.
Because I was super into, Bigfoot and cryptids and go to the library and that Dewey Decimal classification of 001, whatever, where they shelved the monster books and like watching In Search of on TV. And,
Yes.
UFOs were big. And it seemed like when we were kids, we were talking a lot about the Bermuda Triangle, and nobody
Yeah.
ever talks about that anymore. But all that stuff, all wrapped up into the same thing. So I thought, oh, the Monster Manual, super cool. Um, and of course, I watched all the reruns of shows like all the Ray Harryhausen movies, Jason and the Argonauts, and all the Sinbad movies.
Right.
And one of my favorite things of the time was Famous Monsters of Filmland
Oh yeah.
magazine. I'm sure you probably know that.
I got that. The Monster Times also, and I don't know. Did you ever find the Monster Times was like a newspaper uh,
Okay.
rather than a magazine? But
I might have seen that. I don't remember it, but I had stacks and stacks of
yeah,
Famous Monsters magazines because at the time, if you want to know what was coming out with the next Godzilla movie or whatever, you actually had to buy a magazine and read an article and see pictures. That was the only way that we could find out. So I was all into the monsters. So I had the Monster Manual and I had the basic box set, and probably had. Did Keep on the Borderlands come with the basic set, or did I have to buy that separately? I
often
don't
did.
remember.
Yeah.
Okay. I had a couple of those early B modules. I might have had the expert set too, but I know I started with the basic set and with Keep on the Borderlands, like most people. And I tried to play games with friends in the neighborhood. Um, Maybe I wasn't super into it. Maybe they weren't super into it. We just couldn't really sustain interest beyond playing a game here or there.
Right.
Um, I would go to visit family across the state in a real small town, and there wasn't a lot to do, and I'd try to get my cousins to play. Not a big hit. And so I really loved it. I read all the books. I read the monster manual. I would draw my own dungeons. I would make up my own stories. Um, but other than just playing a game here and a game there, didn't have a huge amount of participation in the hobby. And then, heading into high school and then college, the friends I was hanging out with weren't super into it.
Right.
I went on to graduate school, and in grad school, there's no time to do anything when you're taking classes and writing and teaching. Because I got my master's in creative writing, so I was always writing and teaching stuff.
So
And boy, teaching.
what did you get your undergrad in?
So I went to a college in my hometown. It was Rochester Institute of Technology,
Hmm.
RIT, and the T in that name, technology. You think, oh, it's a tech school, and it was. I went there for computer programming. Originally, was my major. And I did okay at it. I didn't like it. And at the end of my freshman year, I thought I could do something different. And I thought about leaving the school, but our school was just starting a new program called Professional and Technical Communication, which was a liberal arts enclave at
Right.
this technical school. So I switched to that, and I took classes in writing and public speaking and all sorts of kinds of communication. And it was a small group because we were the first people to graduate from the school in this new major. So it was a very tight knit group.
Right.
It was a lot of fun. So my undergrad degree was in communication, and then I went to Temple University in Philadelphia to get my master's in creative writing. And I was going to go on to get a doctorate and become a teacher, but the interest in academia was beaten out of me in graduate school.
That's like it's like basic training in the army.
Yeah, it kind of was. It kind of was. So yeah, definitely did not have time for gaming in graduate school. So yeah, that was my pre-TSR snapshot of interested in it, got some of the stuff, tried to get friends to play, but just didn't have a lot of success with it, and I didn't really push it too hard.
Right. All right. So you came out of your master's program, got your master's in uh,
In creative writing, yeah.
writing, and what were you figuring if you weren't going to stay in academia? What were you figuring you were going to do?
Well, right, it was a classic liberal arts degree, writing degree, so I could become a waiter. I could,
Hey, me too.
yeah, you know how it is. Um, Also, right out of graduate school, I just gotten married and was looking for a job. So ended up in Chicagoland in a suburb as a technical writer because I had done technical writing before when I was in college for a software company. It was actually for a software company that made software that ran nuclear power plants.
Wow.
And I was writing the technical manuals for how to use this software. And I thought, I better not screw this up. And then, the next day it was 3 Mile Island. So,
That's a job where the serial comma is really important.
yep, yep, yep. But I did that a little bit when I was in college. So anyway, okay, I knew technical writing. So my first job out of grad school didn't really use my writing degree. It was kind of doing technical writing for the state retirement fund in Illinois,
Right.
which fine job, not knocking it, but I did not enjoy it, was not exciting. I thought, this is not what I want to do for 50 years. So just kind of was looking around for something else. And, for the youngsters in the audience, there used to be this thing called newspapers. And in those newspapers, there were these things called classified ads.
So
And so I saw, I think it must have been a Milwaukee newspaper. There was a classified ad for a job at TSR as a games editor. And I thought, oh, TSR. Yeah, I remember that. That was the Dungeons and Dragons people. Wow, games editor. That sounds really cool.
yeah.
So I sent in an application. They said, hey, great, come on up for an interview. And, before going up to Lake Geneva, Wisconsin for an interview, being an editor to my soul, I did way too much prep for this thing, right? I went to a game store and asked them for the latest TSR catalog.
Right.
I was asking questions about, well, what's this product? What's this product? And the guy was like, hey, you going to buy anything? Why are you asking me all these questions? And so I told him what I was doing. Then he was happy to help me. He's like, oh, wow, sure, I'll help you out. Um, so I went to the interview. Um, I remember there was a group interview with what must have been the creative directors at the time,
Mm-hmm.
because Bruce Nesmith was there. I think Karen Boomgarden was there, who's now Karen Conlin. Andrea Hayday must have been there. Steve Winter must have been there. There were probably like 5 or 6 people in this room. And, they gave me the third degree, typical interview stuff, um, asking the kinds of questions that any interviewee knows how to answer. Like, if you go to Gen Con for a week and you're exhausted and you come back and it's Monday, would you be able to get up and go to work? I was like, what are you going to say? No. So I knew how to answer the kinds of questions they were asking. And because of the prep that I had done at the game store, I knew enough to get by. And I wasn't trying to fake it, but I also didn't want to go in there clearly knowing nothing.
Right.
But when they were asking me about my gaming history, because they were used to hiring people who were steeped in D&D, of course.
Right.
Ask me, well, what have I played before? And so I'm trying to remember, well, I played this and that. What edition was it? Because by now, second edition was out. And I was like, oh, I don't know. What product was it? Oh, it was a box. And eventually it came down to, I remember Bruce Nesmith asking me very patiently, what color was the box? and I was like, oh, I don't know, maybe purple. And they're like, oh, okay, and that made them feel better. at least I wasn't totally BSing.
Right.
But I must have done well enough in the interview because Tim Brown, who was the head of creatives at the time, I forget his exact title, offered me the job. And he told me when I came in that one of the things he really liked about me was the fact that I hadn't grown up completely immersed in all things D&D, but that I had more of a generalist editing background because he thought that would help, fresh eyes, a fresh perspective. It wasn't somebody who came in thinking, oh, this is how we do things, and so I'm going to keep doing them this way.
Right.
And my education and my experience helped, of course. Like I said, undergraduate degree in communication, graduate degree in creative writing. I had done other editing jobs. I'd done my own writing. All that helped. So yeah, to my surprise, I got in. So we moved to this tiny little Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, of course. I remember looking like for a Lake Geneva newspaper to see, oh, what am I getting into here? And penny saver type thing.
Yeah.
I remember that they had a restaurant review for McDonald's, as if it was some exotic place that you've never heard of. And there was a whole thing all about the menu. And I thought, oh my
Irish
gosh.
restaurant just opened up. Named
I was 25 or 26 years old. My cube neighbors, because we were all in cubicles, as you know.
Right.
I had Skip Williams, the sage himself, on one side of me. I had Monty Cook, who of course would go on to become a huge name on the other side.
Yeah.
Jeff Grubb was there. Everyone told me, or when they would ask me, where's your cube? And I would tell them, they're like, oh, you're in Zeb's old cube. Because Zeb Cook, who did the Planescape box set, had just left recently, and they moved me into his old cube. So I felt like I was stepping into the shoes of giants, right?
You got to sit your butt got to sit in the seat of giants.
That's right. That's right.
Pause for a second and switch over here. And I'm going to start on today's sketch. I'm doing it to the Dungeon Master's guide that just came out a couple of months ago. Which, again, that'll show everyone how close we are to having caught up.
I'm going to check the chat, too. I see Owen Stevens said that's how Thomas Reed got his TSR job. I'm guessing you must mean answering a newspaper ad.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So not the only one. That's good. But I know Thomas had more gaming experience than I did when he joined.
But I tell you, one of the things I know from having done the 49, 50 interviews before you is that TSR kind of went through these waves of periods where they wanted people that really knew gaming, and then they didn't want that. What they wanted was people that knew the technical skill. And, it's a good mixture to have, but it's funny that they really seem to concentrate it. Like at some point, they're only hiring people who are gamers. And at some point, they're only hiring people who are editors that don't know games. We could teach them that.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into it later, but after I had been there long enough to prove myself, I remember Tim Brown said to me, you know, I really took some flack when I hired you because you weren't coming from the D&D world, but I'm glad you proved me right, or something
You
like that.
you
And so
you
that felt
worked
good to
out. You
hear.
turned out okay.
Yeah. Well, the first day, man, like anybody's jitters on any first day of a job, right? Bruce Hurd, who was our scheduler, I'm not sure
Yeah.
what you want to call him, but he was introducing me to here's your desk and here's what you're going to do, and he had this long list of stuff. All right, a group at night so you can learn the game and play it and read the box set and do this and do that and try. I was like, whoa. And after he left, I remember just literally wanting to hide under my desk, and I thought, what have I gotten myself into? I don't know what I'm doing here. But everybody has those first day jitters in any new job. um, I remember he had scheduled me for some kind of fan thing where you go online and answer fan questions, and this was about after I'd been there for only a month.
Online,
And I ended up,
there wasn't much online.
well, it must have been some kind of BBS type thing. But I remember going to Monty Cook's apartment where uh, he could be on hand. So if somebody asked me a question I couldn't answer, I could throw it to the ringer. Because I remember saying, well, what if they ask me if so and so can beat Elminster? How do I know? And of course, nobody asked me that kind of question.
Right?
But being the
That's when you say
being the editor,
nerd and run away.
yeah, I was like, I don't know, maybe the Hulk. Yeah. But being the editor, I wanted to be as prepared as possible. But after a month or two of that, I acclimated pretty quickly, and it was such a great group of people that I shook my nerves pretty quickly. So Sue Wineland in the chat says Tim hired her too. So yes, he definitely did know what he was doing.
Yeah. Yes. Well, certainly Tim
Oh,
hired a lot of folks um, that may not have, yeah, that didn't have that kind of gaming experience or resume, but that really had what was needed. And he's a good. As it turns out, you're a great gamer, and Sue is too, right? He had a very good eye for picking the people that were not of the tribe yet, but that would become uh, solid members.
right. Yeah, well, you're right, and I'm glad that I didn't let him down, and Sue certainly didn't. Owen mentioned in the chat that AOL had a tip section in the 1994 era, so maybe that's what I was on.
Yeah.
And Owen also said, foreshadowing a future portion of our chat, that Tim Brown might have said to me, "Why, you might write a book about game editing some." And spoiler alert, I did. We can talk about that.
And then Owen said that
So it's like 1994. Yes. Oh yeah, yeah. Owen kind of pushed me into writing that book, and I'm so glad that he did. We can talk about that when we get there.
sure.
But right, it's 1994, so I think the Planescape box set had just come out like a month or 2 months before I was hired. And of course, that was by Zeb Cook, and David Wise had edited the box set, and he ended up becoming my mentor, my editing mentor. I think that might have been assigned to him at TSR. And somehow I ended up in the Planescape group because it was the new group, because Planescape was the new campaign setting. Just kind of the luck of the draw. Um, it might have been led by Bruce Nesmith at that time, but I know after Zeb left, I think David Wise kind of coordinated it for a bit, and certainly Andrea Heyday came in and became kind of the director of the Planescape group. I don't remember the exact timing, but the core group kind of settled into me and Michelle Carter as another
Yeah.
editor, and Monty Cook and Colin McComb as the key Planescape designers. But there are lots of other very talented designers and editors at TSR who worked on Planescape. Jeff Grubb wrote the first product I ended up editing, and we can talk about that. Wolf Bauer and Lester Smith wrote products. Dale Donovan, Dory Hine, Kim
Hmm.
Beach, they all contributed. There were adventure modules by Skip Williams and Rich Baker and Bill Slavacek.
So what?
So,
Coming in without the D&D background, what did you make of Planescape when it was first explained to you?
well, I knew enough about D&D from the games that I had played and the books that I had read, and of course the research I had done, that I could tell immediately that Planescape was different because of the way it was loose in a way that D&D really was not loose to me.
Right.
The way it blended philosophy with more standard trappings, right? The big tagline of Planescape was philosophers with clubs. Because you had the factions that all espoused different conflicting philosophies. And part of Planescape was not just kill the other guy and take his stuff, but convince the other guy that he's wrong and send him into existential malaise, right? The whole thing about belief on the planes could be made real. And so a whole adventure might be about changing the minds of the people in a gate town that was on the edge of the abyss so that it will not metaphorically and literally slide the whole town into the abyss.
Right.
Um, so I like the philosophy. I like the fact that it was kind of this super setting that all the other D&D worlds could be part of. So all these places that you had only ever heard of as a gamer, the gods and the devils and all the places they came from. Well, in Planescape, that's what you did. You adventured around in all those places and met all of those things and ran away from all sorts of things that you couldn't even hope to kill. So it kind of put players in their place in that way. It was just such a vast setting. Another thing I liked about it was the tone, right? It kind of had this worldly wise, grandiose attitude where you could do impossible things, lots of atmosphere and flavor, not a lot of crunchy rules and mechanics, not a lot of typical plots. It had the
Right.
cant. You probably remember that great thieves
Well, I
slang, the
mean,
cant of Planescape.
that was one of the it was a plus and a minus. Right? If you were into Planescape, that felt very much like a core part of it that you gripped onto. And if you weren't into it and you looked at it and you're like, "This is what is this? I don't understand it.
Yeah, no,
It's not
that
even
and that
written in English."
that is true. And the cant specific. We can talk about your larger point, but the cant specifically, I thought helped it set the tone and make it more immersive if you did it right, right? So
Yeah,
you want to sprinkle it appropriately. You don't want to write it in cant so thick that it's impenetrable. And
right.
so we actually had a phrase for that in the Planescape team. Whenever we had to spice up text to make it have more cant, we would say, "Hey, we got to Burke it up," because Burke was part of the slang that meant a stupid person, right? A fool who got himself into trouble. And so Burke became an all-purpose part of speech around the Planescape team in the office. But we would say, "Got to Burke that product up," meaning add more cant to it. Um, and we had these in-world pull quotes throughout the books. Every Planescape
Right.
product had these evocative, flavorful quotes from characters in the setting, and a lot of that was just practical. As an editor, I'd get the galleys back of the laid out book, and say, "Oh, we got some holes here. We got a hole in this page and a spot in that page. Yeah, I'll write some quotes to fill the space." And so they served a practical purpose as well as adding more flavor to the setting. Hey, everybody who's just joined.
Hello, Chris Andrew.
Um,
Um,
I was going to get back to your larger point about the tone before I forget,
yeah,
because you know a lot of those products were written in that clever, wry, too cool for school kind of voice, and
yeah,
sometimes it did go too far. Like part of the conceit of Planescape, right, was it was the multiverse. It was, hey, you're the Rube player characters from the village. Now you're in the big city, and called people from the prime material plane clueless primes and
yeah.
suggested this is the way the multiverse really works and could be kind of condescending. And sometimes if that tone went too far in that direction, that could be off-putting, and it could give the perception that Planescape was looking down on other game worlds. um, I don't know, Stan. Obviously, you were there at the time. Do you have any memories of how Planescape was perceived by other game groups at TSR or outside of
Well,
TSR?
I mean, once you're in the building, you understand it, right? You get to meet the people that are working on the team, and you understand what the intention is. I'd say Planescape came out before I joined, certainly a year before I joined it, and I was of the opinion looking at it like this looks really cool, but every time I try and read one, it seems like it's a kind of very much what you're saying. It's like a joke I'm not in on, and not that it was a. I didn't feel like I was being made fun of or that it was funny. Just that it's. I felt like I was missing something, and so I didn't have any. It didn't. It was very easy to turn my back on it. I didn't look down on it or think bad thoughts about it because of that, but it did make me just write it off. Right, it gave me a reason
Mm.
to not join in. Um, and once I got there and I had no choice, I was like, all right, well, I'll look at it again. It's like, oh, all right, well, I understand it now. Now it's not impassable to me, and that's one of the things that I took out of that is that I know that you guys were not trying to be impassable, and that in fact the products weren't, but they had the appearance of it, and that was a challenge
Right, right.
that I see in Planescape.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think a lot of gamers did not get into Planescape for that reason because it seemed kind of like an elite club, as you said, and you had to know the talk and be with that attitude in order to really enjoy the products. And that's, like I said, part of it comes from the intent that Planescape was supposed to be the super setting that included
Yep.
everything else. Um, One of the books that I actually worked on as a designer that I wrote was Uncaged Faces of Sigil, and we can talk about that later. But I bring it up now because there was one NPC in there. I remember writing that he took credit for all sorts of things that happened in other game worlds. So he claimed to be responsible for the drought on the Dark Sun world, right? And he claimed to be responsible for this happening on this world and that happening on that world. And the way I wrote this NPC, I intended to convey that he was clearly BSing. None
Yeah.
of it was true. But I remember fans getting mad, like, "How dare you, say that about the game world that I adventure and that's my favorite, and you're
Right.
claiming that it's this or that and changing the origin of it." So I certainly tried to be careful. We didn't want to go in there and just push buttons and blow up other game settings.
Right. But I
Um,
I
One
think
thing,
you're hitting that same point is or it's a similar challenge is that you never meant that, but some gamer out there or some it was a not insignificant group of gamers took what you intended one way and took it literally and then had their hackles up. But
yeah,
the other thing I've found talking to people about this is this happens a lot in generationally within D&D, right? Uh, you have people that want their products to require a minimum entry level. That certainly everyone who worked on second edition D&D talks about that struggle between making it viable for the newcomer coming in and making it meet the expertise level of the person who's been gaming since the original Lightbox.
yes. And I will chime in here. We're getting a lot of great comments. I can't keep up with them all. Colin McComb is here too, which is great.
Hello,
But
Con.
Owen Stevens said, Planescape also had a radically different aesthetic. That was
Yes.
great if you wanted to bring in a new customer base, but not maybe not so great for people who love the more typical look. And it's true because the everything from the layout to the design to the artwork looked different. And boy, what great Tony DiTerlizzi artwork we
Yeah.
had.
Yeah.
Um,
That was Michael Pastor asked a question about, not in the chat. He sent one in earlier about what it was like to get those Tony D uh,
oh,
packages when they'd come in.
yeah, because it's old school, right? They didn't email files. You would get a big box with giant drawings from Tony DiTerlizzi as he was becoming known for Planescape, and they were just phenomenal. It was just so great to get those. Like you felt like you were just receiving these gifts from the heavens as you pulled out these giant pieces of artwork. I will say, as an editor, anytime I got art from an artist and there was writing in the background, like there were crates and a yard and there was writing on the crates, I always had to check because
Yep.
artists didn't always spell words correctly. But getting that artwork was so great. And then, yeah, after Tony, we had great artists on Planescape like Adam Rex and others who also also carried on the tradition as much as they can. But Tony obviously played such a huge role in setting the feel of Planescape based on the conceptual designs that Dana Knudsen had created for the Lady of Pain and all that. I'm
Yeah,
sure previous guests on your show, like Zeb and Colin and others, have talked about that.
yeah, well, that's all
Um,
right. It's worth talking about again. Um,
yeah,
so actually, just kind of take half a step back. What what was the process as an editor? What was the process of dealing with a product, uh, and what were you doing kind of on a daily, weekly basis?
sure. I trust that most people who are tuning in right now know that editing of any kind, but games editing isn't just, well, putting commas in the right place. But, some people do think that. So a project would usually start, I would be assigned a project on the schedule. Bruce Hurd would say, all right, Ray, this month you're editing this project. And then I would start by having a discussion with the designer. Say, all right, well, what's your sense of this? What are you hoping for out of this? But you probably remember the way TSR schedules were. By the time I'm starting the editing of a project, the designer is already halfway through the next project. They're hip deep in something else. So it's not uppermost in their mind necessarily, but I wanted to start by talking to them just to get a sense of the project. And then, of course, I would do the main editing stuff of editing all the words and all the stats, rebuilding the stat blocks to make sure they were correct, doing all that crunchy editing, but also looking at the structure and the plot and the playability. Maybe participating in play tests, but usually the designer had done it by that point. Thinking about how things would fit in the layout. If I thought a chapter was too long or too short, maybe got to fill in gaps, rewrite text, move stuff around, cut text. The designer would create an art order that would go to the artist who would then draw based on those descriptions. And so I'd get the sketches from Tony D or from Adam Rex or from whoever, and they'd say, maybe something like this. And it was great because for some of our artists, you could just say, Pit Fiend Rex a Tavern, and you're going to get something awesome. But sometimes you want to be more specific and describe it in more detail. So you work with the artist on that. Same for the mappers. The designers would sketch out maps, and we had awesome cartographers like Rob Lazzaretti, whose evocative Planescape maps were more like art. Working with them, and as you know, the schedule and the budget really did not allow multiple rounds of art and maps.
Right.
Maybe you saw a sketch, but then you got to get it right. And if something comes in, it's not exactly what you're hoping for, hope it'll still work. So we tried to make sure we got things right before they put a lot of work putting pen to paper. So then, I'd have the text edited, I'd have the art and the maps, and I'd sit down and just like draw a really crude storyboard to show production how the pages should be laid out. Top of page 32, half page art of this, then art. Oh, full page 34 is art. Put the map here. Super rough storyboard. Send it off, gets laid out, comes back to me in galley form, just basically proofs. And then I would proofread it. Sometimes maybe write new pull quotes to fill gaps like we had talked about before, those pull
Right.
quotes that were in Planescape products. Um, Probably my last step was writing the back cover copy. Um, I remember Kim Mohan was an expert at that, and so I learned a lot from him about writing good back cover copy for games.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it goes off to the printer. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to tell you, Kim is one of the people whose name comes up all the time, and I'm so sorry that I got to work very closely with him both in Lake Geneva and in Renton. But I really
Yes.
whenever I started thinking about doing a show like this, he's one of those people who's like, man, I would love to get to talk to Kim, and everyone brings him up as a mentor figure.
Yeah, and I didn't even go to Wizards, as we can talk about, but just the few years I spent with him at TSR, who was a mentor. But he would have been great on the show. But I feel like all of us who worked with him and under him are kind of carrying on some of his
Yeah.
legacy too. So
Like
I'm glad.
I try and whenever his name comes up, I try and make an extra special point to say yes, that Kim Mohan again.
Right. Right. That way we can keep him alive forever that way.
Yeah.
Oh,
Um,
and I was just at the end of I was just going to finish off my list
yeah, go ahead. Go
about the
ahead.
process. So yeah, so I'd send it off to the printer, right? And the book would come back, and we'd all get our office copies, and I'd pick up the book and I'd open it to a random page and immediately spot two typos. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh God,
That doesn't change.
no, that never changes. But that was the general process. It wasn't just, hey, here's the text, add some commas, and you're done. It was much more collaborative between the editors and
So,
the designer, and the editor and art and maps and everybody.
um, and as it went along, certainly for the products that hadn't been begun before you showed up, you were part of the team that did the scope for each product, right? The team would get
Yes,
together.
yep. After a while, when the core team had boiled down to me and Michelle Carter and Colin McComb and Monty Cook, we would just have little meetings where we'd sit around on couches at TSR or whatever and think, all right, well, what do we want to do for the game line? What should next year's products be? What plot seeds do we want to pick up and do as a mega adventure? You know, what should we do with the setting? And it's not like we had total free reign to do whatever, but you know, the upper management, I think, probably didn't understand or care about Planescape too much. So in some ways, we did have maybe more free reign than other game lines did. Plus, they were busy, you know, with all their management or lack thereof at the time. So uh, we could get away with some more things. But yes, we the whole group did conceptualize a lot of products, and that was a fun part of it too. We weren't just taking orders from somebody else who said you will do this and then that and then this other thing. We could do the things that we thought would be interesting to fans.
Um, so, what were the first Planescape products you worked on?
The very first one that I got like 2 days after I was there was one that Jeff Grubb had written. It was called A Player's Primer to the Outlands. So it was a real small box set. It was just a book and a CD. Didn't need to be a box set except for that darn CD. The idea was, I guess, a player's book because we hadn't really had a player's book yet for Planescape. This might have been like the second product, maybe the third product after the first adventure. Um, of course, it was written by Jeff Grubb, so it was great. It was just to look at the different locations in the Outlands. I remember having to do a lot of revision though to add some cant to it and to add some of the tone because it was
Right.
still early days, and so some of that was kind of being worked out. And the audio CD, the conceit of that, it was kind of like a Mimir, which was these magical skulls in Planescape where you could ask the skull something and it would tell you the answer. So this CD was supposed to be like a Mimir. You could ask it a question and play the track during your game and it would give you the answer. And Colin wrote the script for the audio CD tracks, and they were recorded, produced by Flint Dilley,
Yeah.
right, the Lorraine's brother, who was trying to get TSR Hollywood going. And if Colin's still in the chat, I'm sure I didn't give him conniptions, but he can chime in here too. But the recorded tracks, so Colin's scripts for the recorded tracks were great. The audio files we got back, I remember he and I sitting and listening to them, and it was just a parade of bad accents and cringy line readings and just hammy sound effects. You just thought, ugh. And actually, I do see a comment from Colin. Hey, remember the New York Beata Zoo? And I do because he wrote a track of some demon who was supposed to be laughing evilly, right? H E H H E H H E H exclamation point kind of laugh,
Right.
and it came back sounding like an annoyed New York cabbie. Or the guy's like, hey, 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 hey. I thought that is not at all what this should sound like. But we couldn't do anything about it at that point, right? You can't say no, redo it. So we just had to roll with it. So I haven't listened to that CD in 30 years, but if anybody out there has one, give it a whirl and see what you think. But that was a challenging part of my first product, but it was a good experience also to see what some of the politics and bureaucracy of working on some of these products sometimes entailed. Michael Pastor said the sound effects were cool. That's good to hear. But
um,
that was my first product. Yeah, and, you know, we had those module units in those days, right? So I had like a month or whatever to do it because that's what it was.
all
That's what
right.
it
So
was
let's
assigned to me
explain
on.
that because a lot of people don't get. Uh, when the products got uh, conceived, before you'd be told you have this many pages and to fill, and you had to fill them, and the product was measured by what we called a modular unit. A
Yes.
32 page section of a book was a modular unit.
Right.
And so
Thank
both
you.
editors and designers had their schedules planned out by you were supposed to do a modular unit every month.
Yep, basically. And this was basically a one modular unit or one MU product. So I had about a month to do it, which
Right.
is fine, plenty of time. But it was my first one, so I wanted to do a good job. And I remember Jeff giving me good comments afterwards, so I felt good about that. Ian Watson in the chat said, "I liked the CD, but some of those accents were rough." Yeah, yeah. There's probably worse. There's probably worse than the New York Caddy, but that's the one that stands out to me, and obviously to Colin too. But after that, I just worked on almost exclusively Planescape products for the whole time. I did like a Lankmar adventure here and a Ravenloft thing there, just because of the vagaries of the schedule and what was needed at the time, but mostly exclusively Planescape.
Right.
And some products that stand out to me at the time, Hellbound, the Blood War, the big
Yeah.
box set that we did about the Blood War.
I did.
No
I
CD, no
did
CD in
the.
that.
I did the cover for that as one of my drawings.
I remember seeing that. Yeah, that was
Pull
cool. It
that
was a
up
drawing.
here. There we
Yeah,
go.
pulled it up. That's it. Love it. I think the original box set was by Rob Ruppel cover, maybe.
Yes, it was
Yeah.
Rob and Keith Parkinson. So
Okay.
Rob, it was a weird mix. Like Rob did the Drow and the God, I can't remember what the Lilith and
The Merilith.
the Merilith and the guys in the front were painted by Keith Parkinson,
Okay.
or
Got
so
it.
it seemed. That's looking at it. I was trying to figure out how it worked, and that's what it looked like to me.
So Colin and Ian in the chat just guessed what I was about to say. I'll say it anyway. We were talking before about management interference or lack thereof. Hellbound was one of the products where we had some management interference because, the satanic panic was going on at the time, and
Right.
we couldn't call demons and devils. They were Tanari and Beatazu. So we had this product come on out called Hellbound. And I remember somebody saying, "You can't say Hellbound, you got to change the title." And so we were brainstorming up other titles, and our next best choice was Hello, the Blood War. Uh, they didn't like that. So we got to use Hellbound in the end. I think Jim Ward probably pushed for us to be able to use it. But that was a great, fun thing to work on. That whole box set was fun to work on, despite that. Let's see. Yep, somebody mentioned Keith Parkinson, one of the greatest fantasy painters of all time.
Yeah.
Let's see. There's so many products. Since Colin's in the chat, I'll mention one he wrote that I really liked, Faces of Evil, a book all about the fiends. And that was one. Somebody else in the chat, I think Jacqueline had mentioned she was here for Zanzost content. So Faces of Evil was a book where the conceit was it was told by a bunch of different narrators who had all reported on the fiends, and they were coming back to share their knowledge. And so they all
Right.
spoke in different voices and had different agendas. And one of them was a slod Colin created called Zanzost, who was a chaotic slot. Of course, they're all chaotic. And I remember telling Colin at the time, "Yeah, he doesn't sound that chaotic to me. He sounds a lot like everybody else. How about if we make him sound more different?" And of course, Colin was off to his next project at the time. He said, "Yeah, sure, do whatever you want." So I, rewrote Zanzos dialogue to make him more chaotic. Gave him some unique speech patterns and some funny tics, and people really liked it. Zanzos popped up in later products too that were not written by me. He became kind of like a running character for the line. I thought that was fun. I was doing a Zanzos account on Twitter for a while before Twitter went even crazier and everybody fled. But I have recently started it on Blue Sky. I just did my first post like today, actually, because I thought, hey, I'm going to be on Sam's thing.
You did
Going
a
to be talking about
Zanzos
Zanzos.
on Blue Sky.
Yeah, I created a Zanzos account on Blue Sky. If you search for Zanzos there, you'll find it. It's XANXOST. And like I had it going on Twitter for a year or two, just commenting on things in Zanzos voice, and it was fun to do. So I'm going to get that going on Blue Sky. Need more followers for Zanzos there. So if there are any Planescape and Zanzos fans in the chat, spread the word about that.
Tell your friends. You know what? I'll try to get that into the show notes somewhere.
Okay. Yeah, all his tweets are still on Twitter. Like I'm still on Twitter. My account's there. I don't use it anymore, but I did not disable Zanzos accounts. You could always go there and see the stuff he got up to there. Um, we did a Planescape comic once. And
Yeah.
Stan, you may know more about comic attempts because this was never actually published. It was like a 20 or 30 page comic that the Planescape
Wasn't
team kind of put the
wasn't it?
story together.
They
Well, I don't
there was
maybe
one
I
year when all of the all of the teams had to do a one issue comic. Like we had to
maybe
do
that
one
was it.
for Dragonlance Fifth Age. Um, so I bet the Planescape one got done, but they they didn't go out to comic shops. They were only handed out at events.
It might have gotten done. I know you can find it online. My
Yeah,
memory of it is it was kind of a lost artifact and it was just shelved in somebody's file cabinet somewhere, but maybe it got published. But I remember one thing I remember about that is when they were looking for artists to draw it, and why would you ask any artist who worked at TSR? That would be crazy. But there was a list of comic book artists that I found in somebody's office, and I thought, oh, this is cool because here's all the phone numbers of all these comic book artists that I then would love. Of course, did not use them, but that was exciting. Um, Chat stuff. Yo, Owen says there was a Blood War comic where Amaryllis died. Yep, that's the cover that Stan shared. So in the Hellbound box set, there was a very short
yeah.
Blood War comic that I think Rob Rupel did the art for, or maybe Rob and Tony together did the art for. I'm not sure. But that was a very short tale that was in the Hellbound boxed set. That's different from the comic that I'm thinking of. Ian Watson said Unity of Rings, okay, that's the name of the comic, was eventually published on the WotC site in 2003.
Huh. Wow. Because I
And
know most of the others. There was a Forgotten Realms comic, and there was the Fifth Age Dragonlance Fifth Age comic that I know came out. And I say I know all the teams had to write them. I thought they'd all been published, but maybe not.
maybe, I don't know, maybe. Michael Pastor mentioned Uncaged, so I can talk about some of the Planescape products that I designed also.
Sure.
It was not unusual for editors to sometimes become designers. I don't know if it happened the other way much, but I know there were some editors who also designed products, and
And
I
you
fell into that path.
having creative writing, having writing background, were well placed.
Yeah, that's true. And I kind of fell into it by accident because I was editing an adventure called Fires of Dis. The freelancer was Steve Perrin. And I forgot the circumstances. Like maybe he included stuff from the box set that they told him to include, and then they changed their mind. Let's not repeat it or whatever. I was told, hey, cut out all this stuff and add some new stuff. Fill it out. I was like, fill it out. I'm the editor. You want me to write it? And so I ended up adding lots of new stuff to it and got an additional design credit. That was not my intention at the start. I hope Steve, if he's out there, doesn't think I was trying to rewrite him, but they wanted me to
Oh, that
expand the
happens
adventure.
all the time.
Yeah, yeah. But that was my first time. It was like my second project, right? And I thought, oh, I better be careful about this.
Michael Pastor, the comics were standard 32-page floppy comics that got published, and they looked like standard uh, something you would find at the comic book store, but they weren't sold through the comic book store. I
Yeah,
think they were just giveaways, but they might have been sold through game stores. I don't know.
I don't know. Um, so because I had that design work on Fires of Dis, I think again the circumstances of the schedule said, "Hey, here's a Planescape adventure. We need somebody to design it. Hey, you want to do it?" Because I think Tim Brown liked what I did on Fires of Dis, so I did an adventure called Something Wild, which was my first solo design credit. Um, and I learned a lot doing that. One thing that stands out that showed how new I was at the time, I remember writing something and I thought, I need a magic item that does this, but I can't find one. And somebody at TSR said, well, make it up. And I just said,
Yeah,
you, you can do that? Okay,
that's
I guess I
that's
will
all
then.
we do.
I thought I better draw from all the existing magic items, but no, I just made up a new one that I needed. And there was a scene where like all the player characters had gone to the beast lands and they were turning into animals that were kind of matching their class and their alignment. And I thought, this is getting too hard to figure out. And somebody said, no, keep doing it. I like that idea. So I kind of went outside my comfort zone and designed the whole thing, and I liked that. And then after that, they I think I asked for it, the Uncaged book of NPCs. It's called Uncaged
Mm,
Faces of Sigil. So it was just a book of like 40 some NPCs that were in the city. And here is where I think what Tim Brown had said about me when he hired me was that I came in not thinking, oh, here's how we do things. I didn't think, oh, I better do this like every other NPC book I'd ever seen. Came
right.
up with a bunch of NPCs and also found ways to tie them together so that, here's an NPC who's a merchant and he's selling this kind of thing and he sells it to this shopkeeper over here, and the merchant gets his stuff from this person over here. And then in other pages of the book, you got NPC entries on those other people and what they were up to and their agendas. And so in that way, all the NPCs in the book kind of tied together and had this whole interconnected web of
Hmm.
plots across Sigil. And so that made it more fun for me to write. And also
And
every entry I tried to make different. Like some were, straight text, some were like a fairy tale, some was like a wanted poster, some were, unreliable narrators, all sorts of different fiction formats. So you got a variety of NPCs and a variety of ways in which their tales were told.
right.
Go ahead. I think I cut you off there.
No, I was going to say that's one of the things I love about that. I did a couple of products that in similar ways were just kind of let's refresh the style, and what you're describing is so suitable for Planescape, where you're
Hmm.
creating story webs that the DM can pick up and play with or not, and it's useful
Yeah,
both ways.
yeah, and in fact, I remember after that product was well received, David Wise, who had replaced Tim Brown at that point as what were their titles? Head of creative? I don't remember the exact title, something like that, right?
Yeah,
He asked me if I wanted to leave editing behind and become a designer, and I didn't because I like editing too much. But I said I'd like to continue designing products when possible, but I'd rather stay mainly as an editor. But the way I approached Uncaged, goes back to the thing we've been talking about how prepared I try to be for everything as an editor.
right,
I went through every Planescape product to that point and just made lists of NPCs who had been mentioned, and some who were important and some who weren't important, because I wanted to draw from that continuity, probably going back to all my love of Marvel continuity and all those comics I read
right.
for many years.
Oh,
Yeah.
so here now so I told you before we started we're gonna fly through this. We're at an hour
Oh,
already.
oh my
Hour has
gosh.
gone by already. And
We're
before
still in
we get out of
Planescape.
here, I want to make sure we talk about Ray's Cube comics and stories because that's come up in
Oh
other
God.
conversations. But you were the host. You were the host. So from pretending that we're starting from fresh. Hey Ray, what is this Ray's Cube comic and stories thing?
First, I can't believe it's been an hour already. It feels like it's been 10 minutes.
Told you.
So we'll have to go 90 minutes if that's all right.
But yeah, we do. We're gonna go
Okay.
between an hour and 15, an hour and a half. You know what? In
Okay.
fact,
So
I'm gonna stop drawing at this point because I'm at the point where I need to either delve in or focus on you, and I'm gonna.
well,
Uh,
let me look at your sketch first. I've been busy talking.
sure. So here we
Nice.
go. As everyone who's been here before knows, I will finish this off screen. I just updated for people who are uh, subscribers to our free newsletter, 50 Years in the Dungeon.substack.com. You get to see the finished versions first. And if you're a paid subscriber, you get to see uh, a process video, which shows the whole thing like in a minute or so, going from nothing to a finished piece. and I just released the
Cool.
process video for the most recently finished one. There are a bunch. In fact, I'll pull back here. You can see there are a bunch that are still blue that I'm working on. If you want to see them as soon as they're done, being a subscriber there at this free, I'm going to say it again, free newsletter is the way to do it.
Stan, how much does your newsletter cost?
Oh, well, it could be free.
All right. So, Ray's Cube Comics and Stories.
Yes.
I got to warn everybody who's watching or listening, this is the ultimate you had to be there kind of thing, but maybe you'll get something out of these stories. So, when Zeb Cook left TSR, he left in his cube a few little action figures, little
Yeah.
toys like a robot, a pterodactyl, maybe a few other things. And then Stephen Shend, who was a designer editor at TSR, mainly on the Forgotten Realms, a really great guy, gave me a huge box of action figures to keep in my cube because he saw I had been setting up the few action figures that Zeb had left behind. And so he gave me this huge box of all these Marvel and DC characters at the time. And somehow, a small group of us, Colin, who's in the chat, Monty Cook, me, a few others, started setting up these issues in my cube where we would position action figures on the surface and these little displays like they were panels from an issue. And I
So,
eventually had to clear off almost all the space in my cube to allow for these issues. And I couldn't use any of my desk surfaces because this was much more important, obviously. So we would set up Spider-Man and Doctor Doom and Captain Picard and this giant mouse from somewhere and this weird mix of figures and
so
create
if I
these storylines.
can I just
Yeah, go ahead.
interrupt? Just like again, just to make it clearer for folks. So you'd set them up, and they'd all be near one another, and there would be a story attached to why they were near one another, and you would create a story. Span.
Yes. Yeah. So, right, we would set them up and we would then narrate the issue for whoever wanted to come by. So we'd say, well, Spider-Man's saying this, and then Captain Picard says that, and then so and so says this. And we try to make it funny, of course. It was like action figure theater before that was a thing. So and over time, the size of the crowd that would show up in my little cube to watch these action figure stories unfold just got bigger and bigger. Poor Skip Williams, he was across the cube wall from me, and it was always so noisy in my cube. And I remember him saying to me one day, he said, "Well, Ray, I'll say one thing for you: you make things happen," because it was always busy in my cube. But we'd have this crazy continuity and all these long running plots and callbacks. I mean, some days we spent more creative brain power thinking about, okay, what's the next issue going to be? How are we going to advance this story we've created than we would put into anything else? And we would have, we had 10 different Spider-Man figures, right? The one who was very articulated and bendy, we called him Poser Spidey. And there was one who had suction cups on his hands, but it looked like he was carrying little bowls, and he was Soup Spidey. And there was one that was a Pez dispenser, just a solid torso with a big head. And he was calcified Spidey because he had no arms or legs and a calcified torso. And he was always pissed. He was always pissed, especially at our six-armed Spidey. We had a Spider-Man who had six arms and the Pez dispenser Spidey who had none. And so the six-armed Spidey would always lord that over the guy who had none. And one of our storylines was all these Spider-Man had a gentleman's club, which was called the Spider-Man Snuff and Sodomy Club. But the good thing was they didn't know what sodomy was. We had one storyline where they looked in a dictionary to learn what the word mean. And we had a Modoc figure, that big floating head in a chair,
Yeah.
and he was called Too Stupid to Be Believed guy. Because I mean, look at him. We had a Tony Stark figure who had that little pencil mustache and bare torso because we didn't have his armor, and he was Sugar Shack Man because down the road in Lake Geneva was the Sugar Shack Gentlemen's Club. We had all these figures. None of them acted like their comic book personalities at all. They were just regular people. We had a Penguin, the Batman villain, right? He had the tuxedo and the top hat, and his thing was he was a glutton. And so there was one storyline where he was microwaving a burrito in what turned out to be Professor Ape's time machine, and he sent everybody back in time. We just invent the craziest things, and we would write letters to the Raise Cube Comics and Stories publishing group, and we would answer them Stan Lee bombastic style, and I'd pin them on the walls of my cube, and other TSR people would write letters to us. We'd answer them. Um, but there's also a Planescape connection to this, and I'll
Oh,
look at the
really?
chat in just a minute. Yes. So one character. So from the Spawn comic, which I've never read, there is a big gray demon-looking thing called Violator.
Yeah,
Do you know that one, Stan? He's got
I
like a big
know.
horn on his head and mandibles. So we had a really bendy Violator figure. And for some reason, we decided that he was really dumb and he talked like Barney Gumble from The Simpsons. And so he was Barneylator. And eventually, Monty Cook was designing monsters for the Planes of Conflict box set. And he created a new kind of Yugoloth called a Barnoloth, which, if you have Planes of Conflict, you could look at it. It looks like this Spawn Violator demon. And so this stupid character, Barnolator, who in our comic book continuity was just the dumbest thing on earth, Monty turned it into like the most clever Yugoloth of them all, the one who was pulling the strings from everything. He was the smartest thing in the planes. And so that actually ended up getting into print in Planescape based on a joke from our Raise Cube Comics and Stories issues. So I got to ask you, Stan, you were there obviously for this.
Yeah.
I don't remember if you were part of the crowd that would come to watch or what your memories were of Raise Cube Comics and
I mean,
Stories.
it had been going on a while by the time I got there, and uh, you know what? I I didn't feel like I was. It's not like I didn't feel like I was welcome, like anyone was going to be mean to me, but I wasn't moving in that circle. I By the time we wrapped up, I had started coming in to get to it, but for a while it seemed like I just was sitting there because I was above you. I was above,
Right? Yes, you were. So you could
and
hear it
so I
probably.
could hear it. I was like, "Oh, this sounds so good! I wish I was part of the cool team."
We did not feel like we were part of the cool team, but obviously you were welcome at any time.
Yes, well, I
Oh
know
yeah,
that. I know that now, but
Colin mentioned we had a Captain America figure who was not posable. He was in that Kirby pose, his one
yeah.
arm up as he's running and his shield, and he was Lil Cap because he was littler than everybody else, and all he ever said was "wait" because he looked like he was calling for a bus, waving down a taxi. So again, we would just assign personalities and lines to these figures and just play them out. We were just trying to amuse ourselves, and the fact that other people found it funny was just a bonus.
Ian Watson found the Baron-Aloth.
Yes, the Baronoloth in Planescape was based on Barnolator, the stupidest character in Race Cube comics and stories.
See what you find out. Michelle
And
Lugo said
Michael,
you were the cool kids, and you were the cool kids.
mm, well, I think we were all the cool kids. And let's see, Michael Pastor said something about, oh, that's the name of the club that could not be mentioned. And that's
Yeah.
true. Like, if you look on the internet, you'll see people talk about, what's this Spider-Man snuff and sodomy club I've heard about? Neither of those two things happened there. But, so I don't even remember how he came up with that name. But it was just a wholesome place where all our Spider-Man figures could hang out because we had like 10 different ones. And, 30 years later, I can still, if I'm bored, just start thinking of storylines that we did or funny lines of dialogue that we came up with, and I
Yeah.
can just crack myself up. And maybe that's pathetic,
That,
but
no,
the fact
that's
that
awesome.
it still resonates all this time later makes me think it was just so much fun to do.
Terry Latorco, hello. Thank
Oh,
you.
Terry. So
Thank
Terry,
you.
I work with at Monty Cook Games.
Huh?
She's the managing editor there. Hello, Terry.
All right, so we're now over an hour. So let's fast forward a bit. I do want to talk about. We talked slightly about the book you wrote
Yes, we can
for
do that.
Rogue Genius Games, and it's a great product for anyone that is or wants to be a game designer, actually a writer of any sort. Uh, Tell us about writing with someone.
Okay, I will. One more thing Michael Pastor said in the chat, and you never took pictures of them, meaning Raise Cube. I do have pictures of them, which I've posted on my personal Facebook page. If there's a way for you, Stan, to post pictures on your 50 years in the dungeon page, I could
Sure,
share some with
I
you.
can.
I could share
You
some
know
with
what
you
I can
later.
do? I can put it in the free newsletter.
Okay, remind me later, all right? I'll send
All
you
right.
some. So, yes, the book I wrote. So, this was like 2015-ish. I'd been editing games for 20 plus years, doing lots of freelance for lots of companies after TSR, which we won't get to talk about, but lots and lots of them, working with individual clients, and just, seeing people make the same kind of, I don't want to say mistakes. Some of them were mistakes, but a lot of it was just writing quirks over and over again. I kept giving the same advice to people over and over and over again. I thought I should just distill this somehow. And I thought, maybe I'll just put like a top 10 bullet point list on this new website I had just created, or I'd figure something out. And I was mentioning it, I guess, to Owen Stevens at a Gen Con once. And he said, hey, that's a great idea. If you ever want to do it, I'll publish it through Rogue Genius Games. And I said, yeah, I'll think about it. And then for two or three Gen Cons in a row, Owen would say, did you write that book yet? Did you write that book yet? When are you going to write that book? And I'm really glad he did because he pushed me into doing it. So finally I said, all right, I'm going to put together a book of real basic editing tips that any kind of game writer can use. A lot of drafts, ran it by a lot of industry friends, other editors at different companies, just to make sure I didn't say anything stupid like, well, you think people are supposed to do that? No, it's this over here. I hired another editor to edit it for me after I was done, because as a writer, I'm not going to edit myself. And it was published right before Gen Con 2017. It's a small, like 45-page book that is system agnostic, right? Because style guides are different for D&D and for Pathfinder and for this and for that. You can't really have one style guide that works for everything. So I intentionally made it general tips that apply specifically to game writing, and where you're thinking about things like player agency and how to express this and how to say that.
Right.
Um, Kind of walks this line between being very specific for games while also not being too specific for any one game. It just helps designers avoid common pitfalls. And it sold really well through Drive Through RPG as the main vendor. And if you go there and you search for my name, you'll see lots of reviews of it.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's still selling today. I still get royalties from Rogue Genius for that, and I'm just really glad that I could put that accumulated knowledge out there. And if it helps anybody, that's the main thing.
I don't remember that you said this to me in describing it, or I said it based on reading it. But it reminds me, it's very comparable to Strunk and White's Elements of Style, except that was written in like 1920 and is so hard to
Yes.
parse. The number of courses I had, going back to the fact that we both had English and communications level stuff, the number of courses that required me to have Strunk and White, and it was huge. And the number of courses where it was useful were very tiny. But
Well,
there's
yes.
there's good stuff in there, but it's hard to parse. Your book is that level of usefulness, but it's fun to read and it's easy to use.
Well, thank you for saying that, because that was definitely an intention. Because as you know from reading Strunk and White or anything, if you're writing a book about grammar or syntax or good writing, it's real easy to be didactic and condescending and preachy. And I absolutely did not want to do that, because I did not want to turn off any writers. The whole point was, hey, here's some tips that might help you out.
Right,
Nothing in my book is going to turn you from a bad writer to a great writer overnight. But if you're an independent games writer doing your own stuff, maybe you can't afford to hire an editor, you don't work for a publishing company, but you want to have somebody look it over, maybe the tips in the book can help you polish your text to get it to a level that you're more comfortable with.
right.
That was just the intention.
And it's particularly people who are doing their own stuff for self-publishing. One of the things we all have as a resource is our friends that we can just say, "Hey, can you just read this and tell me what you think?" Or
Yeah.
kind of those thoughts of, "Well, you may want to think about this. You may want to think about that."
Whereas to me, I thought, that's the most obvious thing in the world to me, but that's exactly why you put it down, because there's going to be lots of people who have different experiences, and maybe what might be obvious to one person is brand new and exciting to somebody else. There's a
As
debate on the commas going, and the people are
Michael
debating
Passner
Oxford
says,
commas in
your
the
stance on
comments.
the odds. It's as Owen says, it's the correct stance. It's the only sensible stance.
I am in support of the Oxford comma.
Um, so let's see. You're doing work right now. You're doing some work with Monty Cook Games. You've done some work recently with Wizards of the Coast. So you're still involved in the game world.
Oh yeah, so probably from about 2013 when Monty Cook Games started with the first Numenera core book. I was the editor for that, and I've been working with Monty Cook Games ever since. So gosh, it's been like 12 years now.
Yeah.
In fact, Terry, who's in the chat, I just turned over a project to her last week, and she's got another one for me next week. So happy to do it. So I've been doing a lot of stuff for Monty Cook Games over the years. You know, Numenera, The Strange,
Yeah.
Invisible Sun, the Tallest revamp that they did, all the Cipher System stuff, licensed games like Magnus Archives and Old Gods of Appalachia. Just lots and lots of stuff. It's fun working with them, just the best people and the best projects. And I haven't really done much for Wizards of the Coast in like fifth edition or since. But another batch of work that I do these days is for Marvel.
Hmm.
Going back to our discussions about comics at the
Right.
beginning of this conversation. So Matt Forbeck, who we both know and who many
Hmm.
people in the chat know, designed the new Marvel role-playing game. And I never got the full story from him, but he must have put my name in when they said, "Hey, we need somebody to look at this." So he recommended me. I did not edit the book the way that I edit a lot of other role playing text,
Hmm.
but because there's an editor on staff who's pulling the content together and making sure it meets the vision and everything's correct. And you don't say Iron Man's armor is purple, but they needed somebody else to come in and kind of do that continuity pass.
Right.
So on several projects so far, what I do is like a line editing slash continuity pass, not Marvel continuity, because who can keep all that in their head? That's the Marvel guys do that. They know what happened in issue 32 of whatever. I don't know all that stuff, but it's more continuity logic. Like if here's an example. There's an Avengers book coming out later this year that I'm
Hmm.
helping to edit right now. If a chapter has Iron Man's stats and it doesn't say that he has a flight speed, I should point that out because Iron Man can fly, right, with his repulsor jet. So I should say, hey, these stats need a flight speed, or contradictions between rules, or just overall big picture stuff. Does this all work together? So
Right.
I am doing just basic copy editing, but also that kind of big picture, fresh eyes continuity review also. I did that for the core rule book and the Spider-Man book, which was lots of fun, based on my love of all Spider-Man comics. And the
Does
X-Men
Muppet
book,
Sodomy Club get in there or no?
the number of jokes that I made with friends about what I wanted to sneak into that Spider-Man book, man, it was really hard. Did the X-Men book, which was harder for me because I didn't really have a lot of experience with the X-Men, but it inspired me to read a lot of recent X-Men comics, so that was cool. And the Avengers book, so it's fun. I'm not at all working on Marvel comics and Marvel movies. Don't want to
Hmm.
imply that. Just working with Marvel is fun.
Yeah.
And I get access to all this behind the scenes stuff. Like I have the Mighty Marvel Style Guide, which is what they use for the comics too. And I learned things like I pulled it open to make sure I would get it right. Thwip is the webbing sound effect made when Spider-Man shoots a
Thwip.
web,
Yeah. Thwip.
but thwap is the sound effect made when that webbing attaches to something. And you don't want to mix those two up.
Mm.
So the style guide is just full of stuff like that. And I love it because I grew up reading Marvel comics, right?
So,
So that's fun.
like you, I was a huge comic nerd as a kid, and I had a friend. I'd like to say this was junior high school, but it's not. It was in college, and we used to do just contests where the only thing we could say were the sound effects that things made, and we were
A
attacking and countering each other with sound effects.
lot of thwipping and thwapping going on there,
Whipping
I
and
bet.
flapping, snickting and katanging and
Krakow, yes. Oh yeah, the Captain America shield rebound sound effect,
yeah,
Katang, right? Yep. Man, I don't think do comics they don't really do that much anymore. The narration boxes and as many sound effects. The old 60s and 70s comics were just so full of that stuff.
yeah.
And man, they're dated and some of them are hard to read now, but they're so much fun for that reason.
Oh, it says now I want to create two New York City hero critics, Thwip and Thwap. They
They
could
can be
have a
like
radio
Statler and
show on
Waldorf.
NPR.
I love it. They can be like Statler and Waldorf on the Muppets. Flip and Thwap.
All right. So we're rolling up towards the end.
Okay.
So we've covered a bunch of the eras, and we've both been in the game professionally since the '90s, which is more than half of the history of D&D, which is a little hard to believe. Um,
Wow. How can
are
that be?
you
We're only 29 years old.
are you still gaming now? Do you play much?
Yeah. So as you
You know,
know, Stan,
yeah. It's
I'm in a game. I'm in a game with you. You may have
oh
forgotten that.
yes.
No, I'm playing a Shadow Dark game right now that Monty is running for Stan and me and some other friends. For people who don't know Shadow Dark, I guess a really easy way to think about that is just stripped down D&D, not quite old school the same way that the
Just
old
a
school term has that
very
connotation, but
very big indie game in the last year or two has come along.
yeah. Yeah, so I'm playing Shadow Dark, which is fun. Online game, remote game, of course. I'd like to get back into more games, and I'm going to
Mm.
try to start ramping up that in the future. Right now, sometimes it's challenging just to do one game session a week of Shadow Dark, so I don't want to bite off too much, but I would like to get back into more of it because I've got my fingers in so many gaming pies already just with all the work that I'm doing. So I feel like I get to explore a lot of different game settings and game worlds, but don't
Did
play
either
in
of
them because
your
I'm busy working on them.
did either of your kids get into role playing or gaming at all?
Man, I tried and I failed. So when I was a kid, my dad tried to get me into sports so big time, right?
Yeah.
He'd say, let's go out in the backyard and throw around a football. Let's go to this football game. Let's watch this on TV. I had nothing to do with it. I was reading comics and, doing all that stuff. So my firstborn was a boy, Trevor, our son, and I tried to bring him up into comics and gaming. And it took for a while. Like he learned to read with me reading old issues of Justice League Unlimited, the kids' cartoon
Yeah.
version, to him until he could read them himself. When I was working on the Star Wars website for Wizards, we did a lot of articles on Star Wars miniatures. And so they would send me just crates of Star Wars miniatures, little figures. I would give them to Trevor.
Mm.
He would play with them. So he loved all that. But as time went on, he became more and more interested in sports. And so the karmic wheel turned because my dad tried to get me to do sports with him, and I didn't want to. I tried to bring up my son as a total nerd, and he ended up loving sports. And so I ended up doing a lot of sports stuff with him. So, like I said, the wheel has turned. He's gone on to a career in sports media, so it's really worked out well for him. But no, so my attempts to get my kids super into that did not take, but that's fine. I want them to be who they are. And so I think that they think it's cool that I've done all this stuff. But when I talk about it, there's some eye rolling, like there always is.
Well, I mean, so one of the things that has happened in the last, mostly in the last 5 or 10 years, is this explosion of D&D on into the broader culture, um,
Yes.
where it's no longer in that you know nerds category.
Yeah.
Do you think that do you think we're gonna see that trend continue?
Yes. And I have to say, the reason I laughed when you said that was I'm thinking of that Simpsons moment where Homer goes to college and he pulls up into the parking lot and some guys walk by and he yells out the window, "Nerds!" And he goes on for like 15 seconds. But yes, I do think that because what? How long ago was it that we just had D&D postage stamps, right?
That
And
last year,
celebrities, yeah, and celebrities playing and talking about it. It's mainstream now. Stranger Things made a big deal about it. We had the D&D movie that was actually good.
hmm
I just saw a story this week. They're doing a Forgotten Realms TV show for Netflix, right?
hmm
You got all the let's plays with Critical Role. Um,
yeah.
there
Oh,
was
you
a
know what?
D&D
That
live.
you say that I'm going to interrupt you just for a second because
Yeah.
I'm going to be on another someone else's podcast Friday evening called the BAMF podcast, and we're going to be talking about the D&D media interactions, including the what we think about this announcement for the FR thing. So
Oh, cool.
if
Okay.
you follow me on social media, I will be posting a link to that. But you look for the Banff cast or Owen KC Stevens is here in the chat. He might be able to put a link up in the chat for folks to see.
All I know about it is I think it's being done by the guy or the people who were involved with Stranger Things, so I bet it'll be pretty good. So in the chat, Don Honeywell mentioned Dimension 20 sold out Madison Square Garden, which I was going to mention too because I think I saw it on Don's Facebook feed a few weeks ago. Nothing I was familiar with, but it's a live stream group, Dimension 20.
Yeah.
Stan, maybe you know what it is, but they did a live play in Madison Square Garden in January and sold out like 20,000 plus people just coming to watch other people play, right?
Yeah.
It's clear that it's huge entertainment now. And the fact that there's so many channels that are always hungry for new IP, it just feels like, hey, everybody, here's tons of it over here. Dig into this gaming stuff. You're going to have more shows than you know what to do with. So it's cool that it's appealing to everyone now. And, we're all we're all hopeful that the game will continue to evolve in such a way that it really can be for everybody because it hasn't always been that way. We want
Mm-hmm.
everybody to see themselves in the game and be able to play it the way that they want to. And so the next step is not just getting people to come to the game now that it's everywhere, but making sure that they have ways to participate that work for them, right?
Right. Right.
You hear about other guests have probably talked about this, and other guests know much more than I do, but the Hasbro guy saying, "Well, we think what D&D has been under monetized or whatever the exact phrase was." I mean, monetize is such a terrible word to attach to a creative property like
Yeah.
this. And then you got AI. Hey, is AI going to take over as game master? I sure hope not.
Oh,
Generative AI is the bad stuff, but maybe iterative AI could work in some way to be like the thing you consult during a game
yeah.
because it's good for exploiting patterns and reading back rules to you. Um, and at the beginning of our talk, I said something about, well, I bet the 49 or 50 guests before me all had different stories. I'll say the opposite of that now. I bet the 49 or so guests before me have all said this. Well, maybe one did. There's always one troublemaker, right? But most people have probably said some variation of this, which is that, once you buy the rule book for any kind of gaming thing, you don't need to buy anything else, right? Because you can just make up the rest with your friends. And so just the fact that all this stuff is out there and has this huge structure and network is just incredible. But the reason I brought it up is I think despite all this branching out into all these different IPs and how it's going to be monetized or walled off or AI or not, I think it's still, there's so much room in there for just storytelling and narratives with your friends.
Right.
Um, a podcast that I recently listened to and just loved to death is
Mm-hmm.
called Midst, MIDST.
Okay.
Maybe you have heard of it, but it's a narrative storytelling podcast where they kind of make it up as they go along, and they've had some RPG sessions in it too. And it's the same thing. It was just three friends kind of telling a story together, and they wove this whole world out of it. And that kind of stuff seems like it's happening everywhere you look. And so that kind of gives me a lot of hope for just the future of gaming in general.
Yeah. All right. So, last question. Michael Pastor a ways back asked if you could bring back one product from old TSR that's disappeared, or a line, or a product, or something like that. What would it be?
Oh, well, I guess I'll say the obvious thing and say Planescape. And I realize it came back because we have the new books,
Right.
which, spoiler alert, I have not read yet, so I really can't comment on them. I'm sure they're great, but I
Spoiler
would love for it
alert,
to be,
I know nothing.
yeah, I would love for it to be more than just a book here or there. I would
Yeah.
love for it to be a fully fledged game line again. Not because I want to be part of it. I think new people should do stuff with it, but I would just love for that world to be big again, whether it's source books from Wizards or something else. That talk about IP that would make a great
Yeah.
TV show or movie or a cartoon. I think Planescape would be great for that. So that would be the one I'd pick.
All right. Awesome. All right. Well, Ray, an hour and a half went
Wow.
too fast. I guess I'm going to have you on again some other time. I guess I'm just gonna have to.
Okay. All right. For show number 100.
Well, maybe I've been thinking about doing some shows where I team up, where I bring in groups rather than just a one-on-one. And I've been thinking of, so maybe the Planescape team might be a good group to have a conversation with, or something like that. But
That
in
would be
it,
fun.
I've had a great time talking to you. As you said earlier, we only just got to Planescape. There's so much more to
Oh
talk
my
about.
gosh. Yeah. Yeah. I've done a lot of work for a lot of companies between when I left TSR and when I started doing a lot of stuff for Monte Cook Games and Marvel. But, people can look it up online. My name's everywhere.
All right, so you're gonna send me some stuff that I
Oh,
can
yes.
sure I put in the newsletter, and I'll put a link out to your writing with style. In the meantime,
Thank you.
thank you, Ray, for coming. Hang on, I'm going to take you off screen and do an outro, and then you and I can say our goodbyes. Thank you for coming, though.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. And thanks for everybody in the chat. Sorry that we could not see or respond to everyone, but yeah, it was a lively chat. I was glad to see it.
Yeah. So there we go. Another hour and a half flies by like nobody's business. Thank you to Ray for coming and having a conversation. I tell you, sometimes people are a little nervous about it. I don't think it's telling stories out of school that say that Ray was a little nervous, whether or not because it's been so long since he was involved deeply in it. But as we have now proven, there are so many great stories to tell, and I think we hit on a bunch of them. So, again, as I said before, we have a free newsletter for the show at 50yearsindedungeon.substack.com, where you will get updates on who's coming to be our next guests. You'll get to be the first people to see the finished drawings. I will finish that Dungeon Master's Guide drawing right after I finish the 6 or 7 others that aren't done yet. But you will get to see them first if you are a subscriber. You'll also get other things like Ray's going to send me some photos of Ray's Cube comics and stories. The only way you're going to get to see that is if you subscribe to the newsletter. So get on in there. Do it. It's free. I will be back next week, and my guest is scheduled to be Jeremy Crawford, who is one of the he's in charge of editing at Wizards right now. He's one of the main designers of 5th edition in both of its iterations, and also a hell of an awesome guy who's got some great stories to tell. So he will be my guest to cover 2025. This year we will have caught up. So come back next week and see that, or come back. You can always catch it on replay on the YouTube channel. You can catch all of the previous 54 episodes there, and I hope you do. And if you haven't, it's a lot of great things to watch, and tell your friends. The show is beginning to get some traction in the algorithms at YouTube and other places, and that's great, which means more people are coming in and catching up. The thing that will really help that even more is if you are enjoying this, tell some people about it. Meanwhile, you can help that effort by giving this a like, give it a thumbs up or a heart or whatever the like button on your particular platform is. And after I finish talking, and this is in replay, if you leave a comment in the comments, I know if you're in the live chat now, you're leaving comments. Those are great. I love those. But what helps even more is if once it's in replay, people leaving comments, the main thing that does is get that algorithm to start showing this program to other people. And that's what we want. So, thank you all for coming. Thank you. We had a ton of people in the chat today. That was terrific. So glad to see you all. I appreciate you. I will be back tomorrow night with another episode of my other show, Random Encounters, where I do improv cartooning based on random encounter tables. Come on back and check that out. I'll be here at 6 p.m. Pacific, just like this one, and I hope to see some of you there. Till then, take care, everyone. Bye.